Hi everybody, this is assignment 3A, debate for connecting with culture, and we are team 3 for the 4 argument. Speaker 1 is Nicole Rennie, Speaker 2, David Saunders, and Speaker 3, myself, Kylie Risley Assume. Argument 4, the date of January 26 as Australia Day should be changed. Speaker 1, Nicole Rennie. Australia Day on January 26 should be one of pride and a time to reflect on our achievements as a nation, to be equally embraced and celebrated by all Australians. For Indigenous Australians, the 26th of January commemorates a day of invasion and therefore should be changed as the date to celebrate Australia Day. While Australia as a nation celebrates its humble beginnings on January 26th, Indigenous Australians are reminded of the day they were invaded by British settlers. To be fair to all of our fellow Australians, January 26th as Australia Day should be changed because to Indigenous peoples, it symbolises the illegal possession of their lands and homes through the deception of terra nullius, and a date which can never be recognised as one of celebration. The 26th of January means different things to different people. For example, for non-Indigenous Australians, it represents a day of reflection. However, for Indigenous Australians, it marks one of historical injustices, such as the unconstitutional act of theft and British ruling of their lands. January 26th as Australia Day should be changed because it not only signifies a day of powerlessness for Indigenous Australians, but one of invasion and forcible acquisition of their lands, loss of homes, culture, and way of life to be mourned, not celebrated. Speaker 2, David Saunders. Considered offensive by First Nations communities, Australia Day is celebrated by large groups within Australians' borders. However, the grievances raised by First Nations communities. Australia Day and saying Happy Australia Day is offensive as First Nation peoples and others see this as an outright denial of the aftermath and effects of colonisation and Western imperialism. One of the most profound aftermaths of colonisation and imperialism is First Nation deaths in custody. A First Nation woman died whilst in custody for non-payment of fines. Nurses and police officers denied she was an addict and ignored for assistance when her medical health deteriorated during her time in lockup. Government departments and religious organisations caused more harm than good with imperialistic methods to control First Nations communities. There's a pre-colonial perspective on deaths in custody which fuels the anger of First Nations communities, as despite the 1991 Royal Commission, it is still happening through the means of imperialism. The First Nations communities have no real representation in government, which would carry a lot of weight to improve the statistics. I pose it that decolonisation and de-imperialism is the way forward. Deaths under imperialism is nothing new for First Nations communities. Forced by the Australian Army and sent across the globe to fight in World War I and World War II through conscription not long after colonisation, imperialism and federation, leaving First Nations communities at odds with the sentiments regarding Australia Day celebrations. Exploring Australia Day acts as a conduit for understanding how social psychological barriers occur to deny historical and present social injustices and positively constructs a position with colonist states. Speaker 3, Kylie Risley Assume. As mentioned earlier in the debate, January 26 represents different things for different Australians. For many of us, it's a day of barbecues on the beach, enjoying a beer, and taking time to reflect on the amazing country we call home while celebrating our current way of life. However, this couldn't be further from the truth for First Nations peoples. For Indigenous Australians, January 26th is a day of mourning, not celebration, and it marks the day in which 60,000 years of freedom and culture was stolen from them. It's the day they were forced to abandon their beliefs, language, and often even family members, and learn to live the way of the white man. For our First Nations peoples, January 26 is not a day to celebrate, but to mourn. So why do we continue to celebrate on a day that is hurtful to so many? Our opposing debate team may argue that although it may be a difficult memory for some, January 26th is still a significant part of Australia's history, and thus the date cannot be changed. However, many might not be aware that the date and meaning of Australia Day has in fact been changed several times throughout our nation's history. There's a common misconception that on January 26th, Captain Cook discovered Australia. Thus, this is why we celebrate. However, January 26, 1788 is in fact the date the First Fleet arrived and raised the Union Jack, claiming British sovereignty. Back in the early days, New South Wales was the only state to actually celebrate this day, and it was not known as Australia Day, but Foundation or Anniversary Day. Even then, it wasn't considered an official holiday in New South Wales until 1818. The first official Australia Day was actually celebrated on the 30th of July 1915 and was a day to show support for troops of World War I, not the arrival of British settlers. In 1946, the Commonwealth and state government agreed to unify the celebrations on January 26th and call it Australia Day. So, if not the 26th of January, what are the alternatives? Here we have 5 more inclusive options. July 30th. This was the original date of Australia Day, which was a day to support rally for troops in World War I. January 1st. In 1901, on this date, the 6 separate self-governing colonies, which now form to make our states, united to form one and become the Commonwealth of Australia, hence being our Federation Date. February 13th, the date that our government finally took responsibility for the wrongdoings of their past and said sorry to our First Nations peoples. April 11th, that's the date that White Australia policy was abolished. And May 8th. In true Aussie fashion, May 8 has actually been put forward due to sounding so closely to the Australian item of mate. So, if there's very little national historical significance for Australia Day being celebrated on January 26th, why do we continue to do so? As my fellow Group 3 members have made mention, this date commemorates a day of invasion. It symbolises the illegal possession of our First Nations people's land and homes, and is an outright denial of the aftermath and effects of colonisation and Western imperialism. In my argument, I've debated the nation's historical significance of Australia Day on January 26th, and I've also offered some more inclusive alternatives. We acknowledge, while changing the date of Australia Day will not correct the wrongdoings of its past, it will definitely help and be a step in the right direction and would bring us one step closer to all being recognised as one mob here in Australia. Thank you for listening.